The clock on the wall showed 6:30 in the evening. Inside Antonio's Italian restaurant, the dinner rush was in full swing. The smell of garlic bread and fresh tomato sauce filled the air. Waiters moved quickly between tables, balancing plates of steaming pasta and bottles of wine. Soft music played in the background, mixing with the sound of conversations and laughter. Near the window, a couple celebrated their anniversary with champagne. At another table, a group of friends shared stories over pizza. The restaurant had that warm, comfortable feeling that made people want to stay for hours. Everything seemed perfect and ordinary, just another busy Friday night. But at the front entrance, something was about to happen that would change everything. The manager, a middle-aged man named Roberto, who had run the restaurant for 15 years, was checking the reservation book when he noticed her. A young girl stood just inside the doorway, not quite entering, not quite leaving. She looked about 12 years old, maybe younger. Her brown hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, neat but showing signs that it hadn't been professionally cut in a while. She wore a light blue sweater that had seen better days. The sleeves were a bit too short, showing her thin wrists. Her jeans had a small patch on one knee, carefully sewn by hand. Her shoes were the kind you might find at a discount store, scuffed at the toes and slightly too small judging by the way she stood. But everything was clean. Her clothes might have been old and worn, but she had clearly done her best to look presentable. She held a small backpack against her chest like it was the most precious thing in the world. Her eyes moved nervously around the restaurant, taking in the nicely dressed diners, the fancy table settings, the crystal glasses that caught the light from the chandeliers above. She looked so out of place in this expensive restaurant, like a small bird that had accidentally flown into the wrong window. Roberto felt a familiar tension in his shoulders. This wasn't the first time someone had come in off the street looking for help. Last month it had been a man claiming his car had broken down and he needed money for gas. Before that, a woman with a long story about a lost purse. The neighborhood had become more popular in recent years, and with popularity came problems. He had learned to be cautious even if it made him feel guilty sometimes. He walked toward the entrance, preparing his usual polite but firm refusal. The restaurant had policies. They couldn't just give out free meals to everyone who asked. It wouldn't be fair to the paying customers, and honestly, they couldn't afford it. Running a restaurant was harder than people thought. The profit margins were thin and every decision mattered. But as he got closer, the girl looked up at him and something made him pause. Her eyes weren't demanding or entitled. They weren't even particularly sad in that exaggerated way some people put on when they wanted something. They were just honest. Nervous, yes, but honest. And there was something else there, too. Something he couldn't quite name. Dignity, maybe. Or determination. She took a small step forward. Her voice came out quiet, almost lost in the noise of the restaurant. "Excuse me, sir. I'm sorry to bother you." Roberto crossed his arms, not unkindly, but in a way that said he was listening but not promising anything. "Yes, can I help you?" The girl swallowed hard. Her fingers tightened on her backpack. "I saw you have a piano. The beautiful black one in the corner by the window." Roberto glanced over at the grand piano. It had been there for 3 years, bought during a profitable period when he thought live music might add something special to the restaurant. A few people had played it in the beginning, but finding good pianists who wanted to play for tips had been harder than expected. Now it mostly sat there looking elegant, part of the decoration. Customers sometimes took photos next to it. "Yes, we have a piano," he said carefully. "What about it?" The girl's words came out in a rush like she had practiced them, but was afraid she might forget if she didn't say them quickly. "I can play. I'm really good, I promise. I could play for your customers during dinner. Just for an hour, maybe less if you want. And in exchange, if it's okay, I was hoping I could have something to eat. Just a small plate of anything. I'm not picky." Several nearby diners had stopped their conversations. They were watching now, some with curiosity, others with discomfort. A well-dressed woman whispered something to her husband, who shook his head and went back to his meal. A younger couple looked at each other with concerned expressions. Roberto felt a headache starting behind his eyes. This was exactly the kind of situation he hated. If he said yes, would more people start showing up asking to perform for food? But if he said no, he would feel terrible for the rest of the night. Maybe longer. He could see that this girl wasn't trying to run some kind of scam. She was genuinely hungry and genuinely offering to work for a meal. Look, he started, trying to find the right words. I appreciate the offer, but we don't really do live music anymore. The piano is just for show now. And we have policies about— Please, the girl interrupted, then immediately looked embarrassed for cutting him off. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt. But please, just give me a chance. 5 minutes. If you don't think I'm good enough, I'll leave right away. I won't cause any trouble, I promise. There was something about the way she said it. Not begging exactly, but not giving up either. She believed she was good enough. She believed in herself, even though she was standing in a fancy restaurant in worn-out shoes asking for food. Roberto opened his mouth to refuse again, but a voice from behind him spoke up first. I'll pay for her meal. He turned to see Mrs. Chen, one of his regular customers, an elderly woman who came in every Friday and always ordered the mushroom risotto. She was a retired professor of some kind, always polite, always left a generous tip. She had stood up from her table and was looking at the girl with an expression that Roberto couldn't quite read. Interest, recognition, something knowing. If she plays something, Mrs. Chen continued, her voice clear and carrying through the restaurant, I'll pay for whatever she wants to eat. It's just one meal, Roberto. What's the harm? Now even more people were watching. Roberto felt trapped between his business sense and his conscience. He looked at the girl again. She was watching him with such hope, such barely contained desperation that she was trying so hard to hide. Her hands were shaking slightly, though she tried to hold them still. He let out a long breath. One song, he said finally. You play one song. If Mrs. Chen thinks it's worth a meal, then okay. But just one song, understand? The girl's face transformed. The worry didn't completely disappear, but it was joined by something else. Relief, joy, gratitude. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you so much. I won't disappoint you. She walked toward the piano with her head held high, still clutching her backpack. Roberto noticed that her walk was steady despite her nervousness. She moved with a strange kind of grace, like someone who had been trained in posture and movement. It was an odd thing to notice, but it stuck in his mind. The restaurant had gone quieter now. People were curious despite themselves. Some probably expected to feel awkward or embarrassed. Others might have been hoping for something interesting to break up the routine of their Friday dinner. Nobody, including Roberto, had any idea what was about to happen. The girl reached the piano and carefully set her backpack down beside the bench. She looked at the instrument for a long moment, like someone greeting an old friend they hadn't seen in years. Then she sat down, adjusted the bench with the precision of someone who knew exactly what they were doing, and placed her thin fingers on the keys. The restaurant held its breath, waiting. The girl sat perfectly still for a moment. Her back straight, her shoulders relaxed. It was the kind of posture that came from years of practice, not from trying to look proper for a few minutes. Roberto noticed this from where he stood near the host stand, menu still in his hand. He had expected her to be nervous, to fumble a bit, maybe play some simple tune she had learned from YouTube videos. But something about the way she sat there made him reconsider. She wasn't rushing. She wasn't showing off. She was preparing, the way a professional prepares. The conversations in the restaurant had dropped to whispers now. Even the waiter who had been walking toward the kitchen had stopped, holding his tray of dirty dishes, too curious to keep moving. The couple by the window leaned forward in their seats. The businessman who had been typing on his laptop closed it slowly, his attention caught by something he couldn't quite name yet. The girl took one quiet breath, closed her eyes for just a second, then opened them again. Her fingers touched the keys so gently at first that Roberto almost couldn't hear it. Then the first real notes came, soft and delicate like raindrops on a window. Within 3 seconds, Roberto knew this was something different. Within 5 seconds, the entire restaurant knew. The melody floated through the air with a sweetness that seemed impossible from such a worn-looking child. The notes were perfectly placed, each one clear and intentional. But it wasn't just technically correct, it was beautiful, really truly beautiful. The kind of beautiful that makes you stop whatever you're doing and just listen. Roberto recognized the piece, though he couldn't remember its name. Something classical. Something he had heard in movies during emotional scenes. The music was gentle but not weak, sad but not depressing. It felt like memory, like longing for something precious that was lost but not forgotten. A waiter near the kitchen door stood frozen, his mouth slightly open. Another one had been pouring water at a nearby table and had completely stopped. The pitcher tilted but somehow not pouring, as if even the water knew to wait. The couple celebrating their anniversary had their hands clasped together on the table, their food forgotten. The girl's fingers moved across the keys with the confidence of someone who had done this thousands of times. Her hands were small, yes, and thin, but they knew exactly where to go. They danced and flowed and pressed and lifted with perfect timing. There was no hesitation, no moment where she had to think about what came next. The music just poured out of her like it had been stored inside, waiting for this exact moment to be released. And Chen, the elderly woman who had offered to pay for the meal, had tears forming in her eyes already. She was leaning forward in her chair, both hands pressed against her heart. Her risotto sat untouched, getting cold, but she didn't even glance at it. She was staring at the girl with an expression of wonder, mixed with something that looked almost like recognition. The music began to swell slightly, moving from gentle to something more emotional. The girl's whole body moved with it now, swaying just a little, her eyes half closed. She was somewhere else, Roberto realized. She wasn't thinking about the restaurant or the people watching or even the meal she had been promised. She was inside the music, living in it, breathing it. A young woman near the back of the restaurant, sitting alone with a book, had put her hand over her mouth. Her shoulders were shaking. She was crying. Actually crying over something a 12-year-old street kid was playing on a piano that hadn't been used in months. But somehow it made perfect sense. The music demanded it. Roberto felt something tight in his own chest. He had been running this restaurant for 15 years. He had heard music here before, both live and recorded. He had been to concerts with his wife. He had even been to the opera once. But this was different. This wasn't just music. This was a story without words, a confession without speaking, a prayer without religion. The businessman who had closed his laptop was wiping his eyes with his napkin, trying to be discreet about it but failing. His dinner partner across from him, another man in an expensive suit, had given up trying to hide it and was just letting the tears fall freely, watching the girl with complete amazement. How was this possible? How could someone so young, someone asking for food in exchange for playing, someone in worn-out shoes and a patched sweater play like this? This wasn't the level of a talented kid who took lessons at the community center. This was the level of professionals, of people who dedicated their entire lives to music, of prodigies you read about in newspapers. The melody shifted again, becoming more complex. Her left hand played a steady, gentle rhythm while her right hand wove intricate patterns above it. The two parts spoke to each other, answering and questioning and supporting. It was like watching a conversation between two people who loved each other very much, expressed entirely through sound. Roberto glanced around the restaurant and saw something he had never seen before in all his years of running the place. Complete unity. Rich customers and regular customers, young and old, couples and people dining alone. Everyone was experiencing the exact same thing at the exact same moment. Everyone was moved. Everyone was transfixed. The restaurant had become something else, some kind of sacred space where nothing mattered except this music and this moment. A family with two small children sat near the middle of the room. The kids, who had been restless and noisy just minutes ago, sat perfectly still. The little boy, who couldn't have been more than 5, was staring at the girl with wide eyes, his French fries forgotten on his plate. His sister, maybe 7 years old, had her chin resting on her hands, completely mesmerized. Their mother had tears streaming down her face. She pulled both children closer to her, one under each arm, and kissed the top of their heads while keeping her eyes on the piano. Her husband reached across the table and squeezed her free hand, his own eyes red and glistening. The music built toward something, a gentle crescendo that wasn't loud, but was powerful. The girl's fingers moved faster now, still perfectly controlled, still hitting every note exactly right. The emotion in the piece was reaching its peak, and somehow everyone in the restaurant could feel it building in their own chests, rising like a wave. Then it happened. The climax of the piece arrived, not with thunder or dramatics, but with a series of notes so perfectly beautiful, so achingly tender, that it felt like the world had paused. In that moment, nothing else existed. Not the restaurant, not the problems waiting outside, not the bills or the stress or the worries. Just this sound, this feeling, this shared experience of witnessing something extraordinary. Roberto realized his vision was blurred. He was crying. A 53-year-old restaurant manager who considered himself tough and practical. was standing in his own dining room crying over a piano performance, and he wasn't even embarrassed about it. The music began to wind down, getting softer again, returning to those gentle raindrops from the beginning. The girl's hands slowed, the notes spreading out, giving each one space to breathe. She was bringing everyone back down carefully, gently, not rushing the landing. The final notes hung in the air like perfume, fading slowly, reluctantly. The girl's hands lifted from the keys and rested in her lap. She sat very still for a moment, her eyes still closed, as if she too needed a second to return from wherever the music had taken her. Then she opened her eyes and looked around, almost surprised to find herself still in the restaurant, as if she had forgotten where she was. The silence that followed was absolute. No one moved. No one spoke. No one even seemed to breathe. The entire restaurant sat frozen, caught between the world the music had created and the real world they had to return to. Then, from the back corner, someone started to clap. The applause started with one person, then two. Then suddenly the entire restaurant erupted, but the girl didn't stand up. She didn't bow or smile or acknowledge the clapping. Instead, she looked down at the piano keys again, her fingers hovering just above them, and Roberto realized with a jolt that she wasn't finished. She was going to play another piece. The applause faded as people noticed what was happening. They sat back down quickly, some leaning forward, others gripping the edges of their tables. The anticipation in the room was electric now. If that first piece had been beautiful, what would come next? The girl's fingers came down on the keys, and this time the sound was completely different. Where the first piece had been gentle and flowing, this one started with power. Bold, dramatic chords rang out through the restaurant, commanding attention. This wasn't asking for your emotions. This was demanding them. Roberto felt the hair on his arms stand up. The music was intense, almost aggressive, but not in a harsh way. It was passionate, full of fire and determination. The notes cascaded down the keyboard in rapid succession, her fingers flying so fast they were almost a blur. How could hands that small, that young, move with such speed and precision? The businessman who had started the applause grabbed his phone, not to check messages but to record this. His hands were shaking as he held it up, trying to capture what was happening. Others around the restaurant did the same, pulling out phones, framing the shot, making sure they had proof of this moment because otherwise nobody would believe them. Mrs. Chen was on her feet now, both hands pressed to her chest, her face a mixture of shock and something else. Recognition, definitely recognition. She knew something about this music, about what it meant to play like this. Her lips were moving slightly as if she was counting or remembering or praying. The music shifted, became even more complex. The girl's left hand pounded out a driving rhythm while her right hand played a melody that seemed to fight against it, pushing and pulling, creating tension that built and built. It was like watching a storm gather strength, dark clouds rolling in, the air getting heavy with electricity. A waiter had walked up beside Roberto, standing there with an empty tray hanging from his hand. "Boss," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the music. "Boss, who is she?" Roberto shook his head. He didn't know. He didn't have any answers. All he knew was that something impossible was happening in his restaurant, and all he could do was stand there and witness it. The young mother with her 2 children had pulled them both onto her lap now, holding them tight, rocking slightly. Her tears hadn't stopped. Her husband had given up on his own dinner entirely and moved his chair around to sit closer to his family, one arm around his wife's shoulders, watching the girl at the piano with an expression of complete disbelief. The music built higher and higher, the notes climbing up the keyboard, getting faster, more urgent. The girl's whole body was involved now. Her shoulders moved with the force of the chords. Her foot worked the pedal with perfect timing. She swayed and leaned, completely absorbed, completely given over to what she was creating. This piece was different from the first in every way. Where that one had been about gentleness and memory, this one was about struggle, about fighting, about refusing to give up even when everything was hard and dark and overwhelming. You could hear it in every note, feel it in every chord. This was the sound of someone who had been through something difficult and had survived it. A man dining alone near the window had his head in his hands, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. An elderly couple held hands across their table, both of them crying openly, not even trying to hide it. The anniversary couple by the window had abandoned all pretense of celebrating and were just holding each other, experiencing this together, this unexpected gift on their special night. The music reached what felt like a breaking point, a moment where it seemed like it couldn't possibly get any more intense. The girls' fingers hammered the keys with controlled fury, the sound filling every corner of the restaurant, vibrating in the walls, in the glasses on the tables, in everyone's chests. It was almost too much, almost overwhelming. Then something shifted. The fury began to transform. The harsh chords started to soften just slightly, like anger giving way to acceptance. The rapid notes slowed down, became more measured. The girls' playing was guiding them through something, taking them from that dark, struggling place toward something else. Not happy exactly, but peaceful, resolved. Roberto found himself thinking about his own life, about the restaurant he had built from nothing, all the struggles and setbacks and times he had wanted to quit, about his father who had told him he was crazy to open his own place, about the loans and the stress and the fear of failure, and somehow, this music understood all of that. It was speaking to something universal, something everyone in this room could connect to because everyone had struggled with something. The piece moved into its final section, and the girl's playing became almost transcendent. Her fingers moved with a lightness now, dancing across the keys, creating patterns of sound that seemed to sparkle and shimmer. The darkness hadn't been erased, but it had been transformed into something beautiful. Pain into art, struggle into strength. A college-age girl sitting with her friends had her phone out, but she wasn't recording anymore. She was just crying, her mascara running down her face, her friends on either side of her also in tears, all three of them clutching each other's hands across the table. Whatever they had been talking about before, whatever trivial drama or school stress or relationship problems, none of it mattered now. They were experiencing something bigger than all of that. The music built toward its conclusion with a series of powerful, triumphant chords, not loud for the sake of being loud, but loud because they needed to be, because they were declaring something important. The girl's whole body was involved in these final moments, her thin arms producing a sound that seemed impossible from someone so small. The piano sang under her hands, every note ringing out clear and strong. Then came the final chord. She struck it with both hands, letting it ring out, sustaining it with the pedal, letting it fill the entire space. The sound seemed to go on forever, gradually fading, getting softer and softer until it finally disappeared into silence. The girl's hands stayed on the keys for a long moment. Her head was bowed, her chest rising and falling with deep breaths. She had given everything to that performance, poured every bit of herself into it, and now she sat there drained and quiet, in the echo of what she had created. The silence in the restaurant was different this time. It wasn't the polite silence of people waiting to applaud. It was the silence of people who had been changed by something, who needed a moment to process what had just happened to them. Some people had their hands over their mouths. Others were staring at the ceiling, trying to compose themselves. Many were still crying, unable to stop. Then Mrs. Chen started clapping, and this time when others joined in, it wasn't just applause. People stood up, some of them still crying, clapping so hard their hands must have hurt. It was thunderous, overwhelming, the sound of 50 people trying to express something that couldn't really be expressed with just clapping. Gratitude, awe, recognition that they had witnessed something rare and precious, but that wasn't all. The businessman from earlier was walking toward the piano, reaching for his wallet. The businessman reached the piano and pulled out his wallet with trembling hands. He was a tall man in his 50s, wearing an expensive suit that probably cost more than most people made in a month. But right now, with his eyes red from crying and his tie slightly loosened, he looked like everyone else in the room, just human, just moved. He pulled out several bills and held them out to the girl, not in a showy way, not making a big deal of it, just offering them with quiet respect. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. That was extraordinary, truly extraordinary. The girl looked at the money, then up at his face, confusion crossing her features. She hadn't been playing for tips. She had been playing for a meal. But before she could say anything, the young mother with the 2 children was there too, her own wallet open, pressing bills into the girl's hands. "You have a gift," the mother said, tears still streaming down her face. "A real gift. Thank you for sharing it with us." Then others started coming forward. The elderly couple from the corner, the college girls who had been crying together, the man who had been dining alone by the window. One by one, they approached the piano, not treating her like a beggar or a street performer, but like an artist. like someone who had given them something valuable and deserved to be recognized for it. The girl's eyes grew wider and wider. She stood up from the piano bench, looking overwhelmed, almost frightened by this response. Her hands were full of money now, more money than she had probably seen in months. She kept shaking her head slightly as if she couldn't quite process what was happening. Roberto watched from his position near the host's stand, his own eyes still wet. He had been ready to refuse her just 10 minutes ago. 10 minutes, that's all it had been. And now his entire restaurant had transformed into something else, somewhere between a concert hall and a church. And this thin girl in worn-out shoes had done it all by herself. Mrs. Chen was the last to approach, moving slowly with her cane. She didn't have her wallet out. Instead, she reached out and took the girl's free hand, the one that wasn't clutching all the money people had given her. The old woman's weathered face was wet with tears, but she was smiling. "Tell me your name, child," Mrs. Chen said gently. The girl's voice came out small and uncertain. "Lily, my name is Lily." "Lily," Mrs. Chen repeated as if testing the name, finding it fitting. "How long have you been playing piano?" "Since I was 4 years old," Lily said. Her voice was quiet but steady, gaining a little confidence now. "My mother taught me. She was a piano teacher. She trained me every day, sometimes for hours. She said I had something special, something that needed to be developed." Mrs. Chen's voice was soft, already understanding. Lily's eyes dropped to the floor. "She died 6 months ago. Heart attack. She was only 41. The doctor said it was sudden, that she probably didn't feel any pain, but I don't know. I wasn't there. I was at school. The restaurant had gone quiet again. People who had returned to their tables stopped eating. The waiters stood still. Everyone was listening now, not just to a performance, but to a story. A real story about a real person. "I'm so sorry," Mrs. Chen said, squeezing her hand. "And after she died, what happened?" Lily took a shaky breath. "My dad left when I was a baby. Never knew him. It was always just me and Mom. After she died, they found a distant cousin of hers, someone I'd only met once or twice. He agreed to take me in, but he didn't really want to. He lives in a small apartment with his own family. 3 kids. They don't have much money. I try not to be a burden, but I know I am." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, careful not to drop the money people had given her. "There's no piano in his apartment. No space for one even if we could afford it. I tried to practice on a keyboard at school, but they locked the music room after 4 o'clock and I can't always get there before then. So I started walking around to restaurants that had pianos, asking if I could play in exchange for food. Most places say no. This is only the 3rd time someone has said yes." Roberto felt something twist in his chest. This child, this incredibly talented child, had been walking around the city asking to play for food. How many restaurants had turned her away? How many times had she been hungry, knowing she had this ability, this gift, but no way to use it? The businessman who had given her money earlier spoke up. "What's your cousin's name? Where does he live?" Lily looked uncertain, like she wasn't sure if she should answer. But something about the man's tone was serious, professional, not threatening but official. "Why do you want to know?" she asked. "Because I'm a family lawyer," he said. "And what you're describing, a child being taken in but not properly cared for, that's something that needs to be addressed. You shouldn't be walking around the city alone at night asking strangers for food, no matter how talented you are. That's not safe." "That's not right." Mrs. Chen nodded firmly. "He's absolutely correct. And I want to help too. Lily, I taught piano at the conservatory for 40 years. I've trained dozens of students, some who went on to perform professionally all over the world. In all my years of teaching, I have heard very few people play with the level of skill and emotional depth you just demonstrated. What you have isn't just talent. It's something rare, and it's something that needs to be nurtured and protected." Lily looked between them, her eyes wide and frightened and hopeful all at once. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Mrs. Chen said carefully, "that I want to make sure you have a proper home, a place where you're wanted and cared for, and I want to make sure you can continue your music education. The conservatory has a youth program, one of the best in the country. Full scholarship, private lessons, practice rooms available anytime you need them. I still have connections there. I can make this happen for you." "I don't understand," Lily whispered. "Why would you do that? You don't even know me." "I know you're playing," Mrs. Chen said simply, "and I know what your mother did for you. She gave you years of training, years of love and dedication. That's not something that should be wasted. That's something that should be honored. And the best way to honor her memory is to make sure you can continue what she started. The young mother with the 2 children stepped forward again. If you need a place to stay while things get sorted out, we have a guest room. Our house isn't fancy, but it's safe and warm, and my daughter just started taking piano lessons. She would be thrilled to have you there. Another woman, the one who had been celebrating her anniversary, spoke up too. We don't have children, but we have space. And my husband works in education administration. We could help with school enrollment, make sure you're in a good district. Roberto found himself speaking before he even realized he was going to. You can eat here. Anytime you want. Breakfast, lunch, dinner. Whatever you need. And the piano is yours to use whenever you want to practice. We'll work around you. Lily looked around the restaurant at all these faces, all these strangers who 10 minutes ago hadn't known she existed. Her lower lip was trembling. The money in her hands was forgotten now. She was looking at something bigger than money, bigger than a meal. She was looking at people who saw her, really saw her, and wanted to help. I don't know what to say, she managed to get out. This is too much. I just wanted something to eat. Sometimes, Mrs. Chen said softly. God gives us more than we ask for. Sometimes we get exactly what we need, even when we didn't know we needed it. Lily's tears finally spilled over. Not the quiet, controlled tears she had been holding back, but real sobbing. All the fear and hunger and loneliness of the past 6 months seemed to pour out of her at once. Mrs. Chen pulled her into a hug. This frail old woman holding this thin young girl, both of them crying together while an entire restaurant watched with their own tears falling. And Roberto thought, not for the first time that night, that his restaurant had become something more than just a place that served food. It had become a place where something impossible had happened, where music had opened hearts and turned strangers into family. 3 hours later, Lily sat at a corner table with a plate of pasta in front of her. Not the small plate she had asked for, but a full serving of fettuccine alfredo with grilled chicken, a side of garlic bread, and a piece of tiramisu waiting for dessert. Roberto had insisted, and when she tried to protest, he had simply smiled and walked away. She ate slowly, savoring each bite, while Mrs. Chen sat across from her sipping tea. The lawyer, whose name was David Chen, no relation to Mrs. Chen despite the shared last name, sat beside his dinner partner making phone calls. He had already contacted child services, a family court judge he knew personally, and 2 social workers. Things were moving fast, faster than Lily could quite process. The restaurant had returned to something almost normal, though not quite. People were eating and talking again, but there was a different energy in the room now. Softer voices, more smiles. Several people kept glancing over at Lily's table, not rudely but with genuine warmth. A few had stopped by to say goodbye when they left, thanking her again, telling her she had made their evening special. The young mother and her family had stayed late. The children now drawing on the backs of their paper placemats with crayons a waiter had found somewhere. The little girl, whose name was Sophie, had shyly approached Lily earlier and told her she was her hero. Lily had smiled. A real smile. The first one Roberto had seen on her face all night. Mrs. Chen set down her teacup and looked at Lily with those wise, ancient eyes. Tell me about your mother's teaching. What method did she use? Lily wiped her mouth with her napkin. She trained in Russia at the Moscow Conservatory. She came to America when she was 25. She always said that technique was important, but emotion was everything. She would make me play the same piece over and over, not to get the notes right, but to understand what the composer was trying to say, what they were feeling when they wrote it. That's why you play the way you do, Mrs. Chen said, nodding. You're not just performing music. You're telling stories. That's a rare gift, Lily. Many pianists spend their entire lives trying to achieve what you already have. Lily looked down at her plate. My mom used to say I was going to be famous someday, that I would play in concert halls all over the world. But after she died, I thought all of that was over. My cousin, he's not a bad person, but he doesn't understand music. When I tried to explain how important it was to practice, he said it was just a hobby, something to do for fun but not something to take seriously. It's not a hobby, Mrs. Chen said firmly. It's who you are. And starting tomorrow, we're going to make sure you have everything you need to develop that gift properly. David, the lawyer, ended his phone call and turned to them. Good news. I spoke with Judge Martinez. She's willing to fast-track a hearing about your living situation. We should be able to get you into a proper foster placement within the week. somewhere that understands and supports your musical education. And I spoke with my partner at the firm. We're taking your case pro bono. No fees, no charges. We'll make sure everything is handled correctly. Lily's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. I don't understand why you're all doing this. I'm nobody. I'm just some kid who asked to play piano for food. Mrs. Chen reached across the table and took her hand again. You're not nobody, Lily. You're somebody with an extraordinary gift, and more importantly, you're a child who deserves to be cared for and supported. Your mother spent years preparing you for something. We're going to make sure her work wasn't in vain. Roberto approached the table carrying a small business card. This is my personal cell phone number, he said, handing it to Lily. You call me anytime you need anything. Food, a place to practice, someone to talk to. Doesn't matter what time it is. You understand? Lily took the card with shaking hands and nodded, unable to speak. And starting next week, Roberto continued, I want you to come play here every Sunday evening, not because you have to, but because I think my customers would love it. I'll pay you fairly for your time and you can eat whatever you want before or after. Consider it a regular gig. You want to hire me? Lily's voice was barely a whisper. I want to give you a platform, Roberto corrected gently. A place where people can hear you play. Who knows? Maybe a music producer will be dining here one night. Maybe someone important will hear you. Good things happen when talent meets opportunity. The anniversary couple stopped by the table on their way out. The woman leaned down and pressed something into Lily's hand. This is the card for my husband's company. He produces concerts and events. When you're ready, when you're older and have completed your training, call us. We'd be honored to work with you. After they left, Lily opened her hand and looked at the business card. Then she looked at the money people had given her earlier, which was now tucked safely in her backpack. Then she looked at all the phone numbers she had collected, all the offers of help, all these connections that hadn't existed an hour ago. Is this real? She asked quietly. This isn't some dream I'm going to wake up from? Mrs. Chen smiled. It's real, child. Sometimes life is hard and unfair, but sometimes, when we least expect it, it gives us exactly what we need. You walked in here hungry and alone. You're leaving with a future. Sophie, the little girl who had been drawing, came over with a piece of paper. She had drawn a picture of Lily sitting at the piano, with musical notes floating all around her and a big smile on her face. At the top, in careful crayon letters, she had written, My hero, Lily. Lily took the drawing and something in her face changed. The fear and uncertainty that had been there all night finally began to fade, replaced by something else. Hope. Real, genuine hope. Thank you, she said to Sophie. I'm going to keep this forever. Sophie beamed and ran back to her parents. As the night wound down and the restaurant began to empty, Lily found herself back at the piano. Not to perform this time, but just to touch it, to feel the keys under her fingers. Mrs. Chen stood beside her, one hand on her shoulder. Your mother would be very proud of you, the old woman said softly. Lily nodded, tears welling up again, but happy tears this time. I think so too. I think she was watching tonight. I think somehow she knew I needed help and she guided me here. Perhaps she did, Mrs. Chen agreed. Or perhaps the universe just works in mysterious ways. Either way, you're not alone anymore. 2 months later, Lily stood backstage at the conservatory's youth program showcase. She was wearing a new dress, simple but elegant, purchased by her new foster family, a kind couple who had a house with a music room and a beautiful, upright piano. She practiced 3 hours every day now, sometimes more. Mrs. Chen gave her private lessons twice a week, refusing to accept any payment, saying it was her privilege to teach someone with such natural ability. In the audience sat Roberto and several of his waiters. Mrs. Chen was in the front row. David the lawyer was there with his partner, the young mother and her family, including Sophie, who held her drawing of Lily carefully on her lap. The anniversary couple, even some of the other diners from that first night had come, having heard through word of mouth that the piano girl was performing. The curtain rose. Lily walked to the grand piano on stage, sat down, adjusted the bench, and placed her hands on the keys. She looked out at all those familiar faces, people who had been strangers but were now something more, something like family. She closed her eyes for a moment and thought of her mother. Then she began to play. The music that filled the concert hall was even more beautiful than what she had played in the restaurant. She had grown in these 2 months, not just in skill but in confidence. She played with the same emotion, the same depth, but now there was something else too. Joy. Pure, uncomplicated joy. When the final note faded away, the audience rose to their feet. The applause was thunderous. But Lily wasn't playing for applause anymore. She was playing because it was who she was, because her mother had given her this gift, because music was her language, her voice, her way of making sense of the world. And as she stood and bowed, seeing all those smiling faces, she knew that everything had changed from that one night. The night she had walked into a restaurant hungry and desperate. The night she had asked to trade her music for a meal. The night she had discovered that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is ask for help, and sometimes the most beautiful thing about humanity is that people actually give it. She had walked in alone, but she would never be alone again.